Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our little presentation that we're going to be doing from Skillable and Acima. Quick question before we start. Anybody here yesterday? Oh, a couple of you. Want a pair of socks? Just for the perseverance of making it for 2 days. So once again, welcome to our session, where we're going to be looking at really reducing onboarding time. Some of the case studies we're going to talk about are going to be customer focused, but if you're interested in like staff onboarding, a lot of the things we're going to talk about would equally apply to staff onboarding within your own organizations. So as you would have noticed, I'm not Sarah. Some advantages, I'm taller. Disadvantages, nowhere near as beautiful as Sarah. She would have had a much better experience. However, Sarah's marketing, I'm product. So one of the things you will get from me is not so many statistics, more practical tips and things along those lines. So that might be quite useful. I'd also like to introduce Ben. He's from Acima, and he's going to say a few words about himself.
Hi there, I'm Ben Galoni from Acima. I work with marketing and product for Acima. I've been here for 20 years, so any questions that you have about our solution, and again, we're going to talk about customer onboarding, internal staff onboarding, all the kind of use cases we go through apply for both. So yeah, hopefully we can answer any questions that you've got today.
Thank you, Ben. So just in terms of me, I've actually been in education for in excess of 30 years, teaching people, and actually one of the things that I've been really interested in from the point of view of enabling staff, customers, whoever it would be, is actually how we keep them engaged and how we really turn what they learn into something new and productive. So this sort of thing's really interesting to me. So I think we're actually living in quite an interesting time at the moment. If I look at my 30 years in education, things have evolved from the point of view of things like instructional design and those sort of things. However, and I see this even in this show today with customers that I've spoke to, even though, if we go back 30 years ago, learning was very much procedural based, do this, click here, go there. Even though that sort of methodology has really evolved, a lot of people don't implement that new evolution of methodology, because ultimately very procedural based learning is a safe place to live. We know that we can create content that actually meets the lowest common denominator, and if we're the people creating that content, we just know that people will be able to complete it, and it's a safe world to live in. Unfortunately, when I used to work in the sales side of Skillable, biggest question we always got is, how do you deal with engagement? How do you ensure that users are attentive to the learning? And of course, often one of the biggest things that disengages users is content they don't find interesting. So that's why I actually think that we are actually in a really interesting point, because where content has evolved and could have evolved, no one's taken those opportunities. But everyone talks about AI now from a content point of view, and I think we are really starting to enter that world where content can be more dynamic. So therefore, it allows people to focus on what they need to know, how to do their job, problem solve within their job. So I think we really are getting to that point where people can use learning as an on-the-job tool to really evolve their productivity. So whether it's stuff that actually, organizations might be selling to customers to learn, to get their people up to speed, or it's even stuff that you're using in-house and so on. So I think really, as we move forwards, we're really going to see this sort of whole concept of experiential learning. From our point of view, we want people to practice what they preach. They want to go in there, do the work, let's be honest, if we think about from a learning point of view, I'm sure most of us have got driving licenses here, and it's a very common thing that we all say, when you're taking your driving lessons, you're actually learning to pass the test. You don't actually learn to drive until you pass your test and you start driving. That's that experiential part. So in reality, when you're doing that procedural based learning, it's almost like you're learning to pass a test. You're not learning to do your job. So hopefully that's the evolution that we're really trying to look at and drive through the technologies that we have in place today and coming in the future. So when we look at the learning journey most people go on, ultimately, I remember when I was new in IT and people would give you a piece of software and say, go learn that. It's one of the hardest things to do. Unless I've got an objective, unless I've got where do I start? So formal learning's always been a place. Let's give you get those training wheels on you so you know what potential possibilities with this bit of software is going to be. Then what normally happens, in my years of being an instructor, often it would be, you'd give people those training wheels. The next thing they do is they go into the office and they work with their peers and go, well, how do we actually use this in our environment and things along those lines? So they then start to try and find out what those practicality pieces are. And that's sort of been a very sort of traditional way of going. And then actually, they only really start to learn when they use the software. Yeah. One of the things that used to break my heart as an instructor was when people used to come on training courses and then you say, oh, you could do this, and this would be a really great thing, and this would really benefit you and your organisation. And they go, yeah, not allowed to do that, I have to follow these instructions. If a company don't want to evolve, that's what you do. Because ultimately we need to empower people, and we empower them through education. And really allow them to sort of, improve the job they do. So when we think about experiential learning, there are lots of ways that we can give people practical skills, lots of tools. And, and we're not worried about talking about, partners we work with or our competitors. And the reason for that is, we feel we have a much broader portfolio than some of these, and we'll get to that in a moment. So often people talk about, virtual hands-on labs. There's stalls around here. We've got a mention of it on our stand and that. And that's generally where you're, working in, live environments. People are really using the software and, being able to sort of explore a little bit. Unfortunately, these often have a lot of fundamental problems. First of all, they're procedural based. Step 1, click here. Step 2, click there. Okay, that's got to evolve. AI does that for us. The other thing with these sorts of things is, from a lot of customers' point of view, they feel these take a really long time to build. Again, from a sales point of view, we end up in this situation where it's, well, how long is it going to take me to build those? And I would say, we go back 18 months, you might be having that conversation of, well, each lab's going to take you days, depending on the complexity, maybe a week or more. Okay. I did actually have a vision in Skillable a year ago, build a lab in a day, and we now do that. You can build any lab you want within a day. So that's completely customized and things. And actually, I did a bite-sized session earlier on. We built a lab in 10 minutes. Okay, and that has skills validation assessment in it as well. Now, when I say built a lab in 10 minutes, it's 20 minutes for me because I type badly. But other than that, it's really fast. We then get that sandbox environment, and this has been a tool that's been around for a long time. So generally, you can often be putting people in real environments, but you don't really give them any guidance. I've always really struggled with the concept of a sandbox or a playground, because, how do you make sure people are working on what they're meant to be working on, or how do you get them started, those sort of things. But this is a great place where, we sit with AI again. We have this concept of learner-led learning, where the user writes their own lab. So they basically, let's say, for example, they've been on that training course. They've gone back and the boss goes, you've been on a course, I've got a task for you. And they go, oh, I don't know how I'm going to do that. They fire up their sandbox environment and they type the task in the lab. The lab tells them how to do it. And then they go, right, now I've practiced it, let me go do it for real. Okay? But not everything fits into this model. And this is really where, products like Acima become really, really critical and important. Simulations become a real important part of the story. Now again, you go to some of the virtual hands-on lab companies and they'll go, oh no, virtual hands-on, that's the real way, that's the only way. Okay? It's not. Simulations are critical in actually being able to impart skills. Often simulations can be fantastic when you need to be focusing on the procedural part of the process. Sometimes, how do I make sure they do it this way rather than that way? Simulators can be brilliant for that. there's lots of software solutions which just don't lab very well. Especially when everything's cloud enabled. We come across lots of startups that want to build labs for their platform, for their customers. But because they're startups, their product's nowhere near mature enough because it doesn't have the appropriate APIs and things along those lines. Simulators are brilliant for that. Other use cases, we got some things that people like to learn about. It costs $1,000 a user to spin up the software. Live software is not a practical solution for that. So those sort of things exist. So it's really important that, from an experiential learning point of view, it's all about the right tool for the right use case. And it's also about making sure that, embrace all of the tools. One of the things, I said I wasn't going to do statistics. The one statistic that just makes me, as an educator, just hurts me all the time. So back in 2022, worldwide, the training budget was over $360 billion. And it achieved 90% dissatisfaction. People didn't feel empowered, people didn't feel skilled. And in my world as an educator, that's failure. We've got to fix that, we've got to do that. And that's what we want to do. So we have a slide here which really just sort of highlighting, just looking at, places where things like simulations fit, labs fit, and things. And it is a little bit of a case-by-case basis. You want scenarios where users can explore. Then generally real software fits that better because sometimes a simulator only represents a percentage of the functionality and things along those lines. So it really depends on the use case that you actually want. Where does the simulator fit? And where they fit, they excel. That's the thing that I generally find with simulators. They really excel very, very well. One of the things, often becomes a bit of a challenge when you start looking at your hands-on experiences is also getting that measurable data. And again, different solutions are going to allow you to achieve different levels of measurable data. What I would say is if you're sort of the organization, whether it's for customers, whether it's for partners, whether it's internal staff, if you're really starting to look at how do we measure engagement, how do we measure user efficiency, can they really do the jobs, these things that labs traditionally can't tell you, but it's always the questions people have. What I would say is keep an eye on Skillable over the next 6 months. We have got a revolutionary piece of technology that I'm not going to tell you about other than what I've already said because we're waiting for patent. We think this is going to really revolutionize the marketplace. So keep an eye on our website over the next 6 months. We've got it up and running. We just want to patent it before we tell anybody about it because we do think it's going to just be a complete disruptor. So in terms of Skillable, in terms of what do we deliver? We really, that didn't work quite as planned. Just going to go back a slide. The clicker's not letting me go back a slide. Oh, cool. There we go. Thank you much. So really what I wanted to get to is, from a Skillable, and this is my one marketing slide, is our driver is enablement, empowerment, and education. And hopefully by that we make money. So actually, we want to, partner with our customers, partner with other organizations to make sure that the education or the way you deliver the education is correct for your learning outcome and your learning needs. So we don't silo ourselves into, or we do sandboxes, or we do hands-on labs, or we do simulators. We want the correct solution for the correct particular outcome that you're actually after and want to generate. So obviously, labs is where we made our bread and butter to start with. But and I remember a time at Skillable when we would turn around and say things like sandboxes. Oh, that's a dirty word. No, because we've got instructions and we can do this and we would. But it's just a form of hands-on experiential learning, and we want to embrace the whole lot and enable people with the whole lot. Right tool for the right outcome. You don't want to try and sort of shoehorn people into the wrong places. So live environments, simulations, sandboxes, they are all good learning tools used in the correct context. There's lots of things And if you obviously want to pop to our booth at the end, that we can show you in terms of things that we can enable within our environments. This happens to be a live experience. So, we always put a spreadsheet up because everybody knows what a spreadsheet is. Often when you do other things, people go, well, that's not really us, but everyone knows what a spreadsheet is. So it's really a case of making sure that, users are becoming productive, validating what they're doing, so we can actually make sure that they've actually got the skills you want. So you can either give users confidence. So if it's more of a procedural experience, you use this tool at the bottom, so they actually think, actually, I've got that right. I'm really good about that. So you're not marking it. It's about engaging with the student or the person learning, and they can do the job. Of course, if you've got that position then where, if someone wants to get a promotion, move to the next level, they say they've got the skills, but have they got the skills? This can then become more of an exam thing. So you can then actually start to do things like real skill validation. So the instructions will be more scenario based. For example, when this is a spreadsheet, go create a pivot table that does X, Y, Z. Okay, and then we grade it. You've got the skills, you got that right. So basically that puts them in that position that they can apply maybe for other positions within the organisation. So this becomes a real way of enabling staff to prove they've got the skills. I'm sure a lot of you have been in situations where organisations do self-assessment for skills. You give people forms or whatever, and how good are you? And what I've generally found, that I'm going to be very general now, so we know I'm 100% wrong. Okay, is the people that say, I think I can do that, I think I can do that, I think they're normally the ones that are really good. The ones that go, yeah, I'm brilliant at that. Yeah, they're the ones that normally can't do it that well. So people either overrate themselves or underrate themselves. And normally it's then backed, by a bit of a manager validation maybe that might adjust that a little bit. So, we support sandboxes for those playground environments, but actually one of the things, we don't have a slide for this here, is, we can have sandbox environments with things like, say, integrated chat. So the user's been asked to complete a task from their boss, they type the task in, it writes the lab for them, and then they can practice in a safe, secure environment, sure they've got the skills before they risk it on the live environment. It likes to animate quite a lot, there we go. So as I mentioned, obviously scenario-based instructions and then scoring associated with that. Like any of these things, like one of the things when I used to work in the sales side, if people go, oh yeah, we want this, this and this. You say you want this, this and this. What are the outcomes you're trying to drive? Again, it's a bit like the options list on when you're buying a brand new car. I want it all, but why? As my wife always says, it's just more stuff to break. So it's actually about making sure that you've got the right things for the right outcomes. And that's what we try to do here. So I'm going to hand over to Ben, and he's going to walk you through some examples in his space. The clicker's a bit sensitive. You might want to use the keyboard.
I use the laptop. Thank you. So, in terms of ACEMA, here we go, back to the start. Very much building on the experiential learning and how do we do things differently. So, ACEMA started up over 20 years ago in terms of the simulation space. And what we did is we tried to build a platform that wasn't built on screenshots. So our tool is unique. All the other tools, or most of the other tools out there, they take pictures of your software. We clone systems. So what does that mean? Ultimately, it looks, feels, and acts like the live environment. So all the scroll bars work, the edit fields work. You feel like you're in the live system. Now, with ACEMA, what that means is that from an experiential learning point of view, you get a very sort of interactive learning environment that can be deployed at scale. We can translate all of the content into multiple languages. We can desensitize the data. So if you only have processes that work in a production environment, we can capture those and change the data during the recording process because we're not taking a picture. So we have lots of customers within the financial sector, for example, where the processes only work in the live environment. So with Acima, we're able to enable you to create content from those live systems without exposing any sensitive data. And ultimately, because it's all SCORM compliant, you can then deploy that at scale. So this is what Acima offers. It's a very different approach to traditional simulation tools, and it works in multiple sectors. We're not sector agnostic. So I just want to go through our case study. It was Ultimo. They're a software company in the Netherlands. So they have to train their customers, but their case study ultimately is the same as your own onboarding within an organization. It doesn't matter that it's customers, it can be your internal staff as well. But ultimately, and as we talk about experiential learning, their challenge was that they needed to train their customers on how to use their platform. And the results were that they were able to reduce their adoption days from 50 to 40 days for their customers, bring their customer satisfaction up. But the other thing is they were able to train in multiple languages. So they had to deliver their content in 5 different languages. Anybody who's used any sort of screenshot tool out there, if you want to create multilingual based content, you have to launch a system in every language and capture your processes in every language, which means you then have, in their case, 5 times the amount of content that you then have to maintain, and so on and so forth. So the other challenge they had is rapid release cycles. They change their software every 2 weeks. For them to be able to maintain videos and screenshots was a nightmare, especially in 5 different languages. So that's where they used Acima. Ultimately, they were able to create their content with our clones, and they're able to maintain them because we have one set of lessons for all of the languages, because we translate our clones. It's not a picture. So for us, it really is a game changer for them, because they're able to deploy their content in all of these different languages and keep up to date with their constant release cycles. The other thing that we're able to do is, because it's all SCORM compliant, they can deploy it on their learning management system. So it means that every time they onboarded a customer, before they have their software ready for that customer, they can give them access to the training material and get everybody up to speed before they use the live environment, which is key. Again, it's giving them that hands-on experience of how the software behaves before they use a live environment. And that's where our partnership with Skillable, being able to provide that experiential learning experience depending on which solution fits or solves your specific problem. So, as I said, ultimately, they reduced their onboarding time by 10 days, 20% reduction in customer onboarding through using the Acima software because of those things I talked about. And they've won awards for it now, so it's a proven case study in terms of experiential learning. That's pretty much it from us. Are there any questions from anybody? Nobody wants to ask a question. It's that time, isn't it? You train. You need to get home. Any questions for Paul? Oh. Yeah, ultimately, yes. A lot of our customers end up replacing their training environment. So Paul talked about sandbox environments. I think we both agree sandbox environments are the bane of our lives. How can you train in a sandbox environment? It's not set up, no data, you have to create data, you have to refresh it all the time. And ultimately that's where both labs and simulations come into play. We're able to replace those environments, and it's something that can be used over and over again. I don't know if you want to say anything
Yeah, just the other thing from Skillable's point of view is we are a completely virtual infrastructure, so actually you don't, again, need to maintain a training environment. It's just literally a web browser to connect to any of our labs and things along those lines. So again, you don't need to maintain any content. And a little bit off topic, but ultimately one of the things we often see is organisations that do maintain infrastructure for training purposes. And it ages, it needs maintaining, it have reliability problems, and then before you know it, it doesn't scale enough to do your onboarding training because your business is growing, and all of a sudden you can't support enough users and things. So, classic place where we would sit and we would actually, fun enough, I was actually talking to a customer yesterday, and they were saying, they're actually limited by their onboarding training on how many people they can employ every month. So actually the business is outgrowing their ability to employ people, and it's at that point of, do they make the investment, or of course, talking to us, they could replace their onboarding infrastructure with what we do and only pay for as they use it.
I mean, ultimately the case of keeping that infrastructure in place and then having someone to support it, then someone to refresh the data because you've got only a certain amount of data sets. Then you get the testing team come in and mess up all your data sets, so You've then got to refresh it. I can see a few of you nodding, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. It's a nightmare, whereas with our solutions, it's scalable, but ultimately you can reuse it over and over again. And everybody gets the same experience. That's the point of it, because if you move into classroom or virtual instructor-led training with these environments, depending on who you get, depends on the type of experience you get. And so with this, you're digitizing it. So, I mean, how many times do we have, you probably have it as well, where customers, I can't onboard these people because they've joined halfway through the week. So they have to wait until the next week before they can jump into a session. With digitizing this process, ultimately, you've got the ability to say, even before they join, here's a login, we want you to go and learn these familiarization courses, get up to speed with our business and our processes, and you get sort of two results from that. You get, they feel good because they feel like you care about them and you're able to scale them quickly, but also it means that you're not scrabbling around trying to train people and fit them into courses and things like that. So the amount of case studies we have between us in terms of digitizing that onboarding and reducing the amount of time using this technology, it helps everybody.
I think the other thing that I really like, actually, and we've had a couple of examples of this recently with customers where the simulation stuff fits in really well, is often you get companies that come along and go, you can bring your enterprise environment, and in reality it's only ever a snapshot of it and it's a small piece, and people go, well, it's not quite like what we've got, it's similar but it's not quite. And for some people the differences are big enough that they can't relate it to the real environment. And one of the reasons you end up in that situation is quite often the real environment can actually just take so much resource to run. The startup times, we had one customer, like their environment was 90 minutes to start up. So you end up in this situation of, right, I press start for my hands-on lab. Right, let's go to lunch. That's not the experience you want. So again, things like the simulation stuff just solves those problems as well, because it's not dependent on those things starting up in the background. So you launch, you go. So people really get the learning at the moment they want to engage with the learning.
Any other questions?
Do you have any customers that work in secure environments? Because you mentioned browser, but if you have any clients that are working at S or above S, could this still be a viable solution?
I'll go first.
So, in a lot of ways, yes. So I used to work for QA training, some of you might know, and I've worked for a number of customers that shall not be named. So in reality, like when we used to use Skillable for their training, So the key thing generally from the point of view of things like hands-on labs for those types of organisations is the physical environment they're in is not enclosed within that area that's at that security level, but we can teach them and use them and so on. You do run into situations, so just something they actually run out of money, funny enough, but we was having a conversation with NATO a little while ago, and they had some very specific requirements. And obviously the conversation we was having is, we'd come and run our stuff in your location if you want, so you can have it secured in your data center. So there are solutions that we have for those problems. I'm pretty sure Asena's even cleaner than that.
Yeah, I mean, from our point of view, all of the outputs are SCORM compliant, so if you want to put them in a learning management system, it's within that environment. We also have customers within, actually finance is probably more secure than other sectors, surprisingly enough. The amount of assessments we have to go through with some of our customers it can be quite ridiculous actually, but yeah, we're ISO certified as well in terms of our organisation. But yeah, it is cloud based, but we do have customers within those sectors.
I think we're at time, so I think it's 15:15. So really, thank you very much, everybody, for your time. Thank you for questions. Really appreciate it. Ben?
Yeah, if you want to know any more about Skillable, their stand is that way. Acima, our stand is just over there in K01. So if you want to see a demo or pick up any literature, please come find us.
Thank you.